A Scientific Revolution, Part 3, Starlight, by Francis Watts. Quote from a poem by Robert Frost. This is the end of it. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. A wave understanding of light may produce the most simple explanation for light, and it may simplify our understanding of the universe, but there is a problem. It conflicts with the other great act of unification and simplification, Newton's explanation for planetary motion, which unified heaven and earth into a single understanding. In Newton's explanation, planets move through empty space. It is because the space is empty that the motion is constant. If that space is not empty, the planets would experience drag as they move through what fills it and slow down over time. This is not what happens, therefore, outer space is empty. However, in the wave explanation of light, outer space is filled with a medium that is physical, and if it is physical, it should slow the motion of planets that move through it. Both Newton's explanation for planetary motion and the wave explanation of light are great simplifications, but they say conflicting things about the outer space through which they both move. The motion of light through outer space says it is filled, and the motion of planets through outer space say it's empty. How can outer space be both empty and filled at the same time? This was the conflict at the beginning of the 20th century. This is why the wave theory was abandoned and replaced by the particle theory. If light is a particle, then outer space is not filled, and there is no conflict between our understanding of light and planetary motion. It was a move that seems to have been made with the intent of resolving conflict, but the opposite has clearly happened. In resolving this one conflict, many new ones have been created. Instead of more simplification, we have gotten complexity. At the beginning of the 20th century, physics was at a crossroads. Faced with this conflict, a path forward was chosen to abandon the simple wave theory of light and replace it with something that is more complicated but does not conflict with Newton's explanation for planetary motion. This, however, was not the only possible path forward. While Newton's theory of planetary motion is a great act of simplification, an alternative exists that is even more simple. It is not some new unthought of theory, it is what was popular before Newton's theory came along, though it rarely gets mentioned in our history books. Before Isaac Newton, there was René Descartes. He had a different explanation for planetary motion. While Newton explained planetary motion in terms of basic laws of motion and the concept of a fundamental force, gravity, René Descartes explained planetary motion in terms of basic laws of motion alone. Descartes invented no new concepts, and while in Newton's explanation, planets move through empty space, in Descartes' explanation, the planets move through an outer space that is filled with a medium through which waves of light move. The Earth and the medium are in outer space are moving together. This is significant because this is the alternative explanation for the Michelson-Morley experiment discussed in Part 2. Descartes' explanation for planetary motion is called the vortex theory. The word vortex is a fancy-sounding word for something very common that happens all the time. Fluids rotate. That's what a vortex is. René Descartes' explanation for planetary motion was based upon the rotating fluids that he saw all around him. It didn't just explain how the individual planets move, it explained how they all moved together. Planets don't just orbit the sun, they do so in the same direction and on the same orbital plane, same imaginary plane. A rotating fluid explains all of it. It even explains why the constant speed at which different planets move is relative to the distance from the center of rotation. In this alternative explanation, it's not that the force of gravity does not exist. Of course it does. Gravity explains why things fall, why planets orbit the sun. It's that gravity is a force that has a physical explanation, like waves of light are physical. Gravity can be explained without inventing new concepts. A whirlpool is a rotating fluid, and it has a force towards the center of rotation. That force has a physical explanation. It is a pressure force. While physical forces move through space, carried by waves and particles, physical pressure forces are different. They simply exist in space, just like gravity. During the scientific revolution, both theories were well known and their basic differences understood. According to Occam's razor, Descartes' explanation is the more simple explanation. But there was one observation that could not be explained in terms of Descartes' vortex theory. That was the motion of comets. While Descartes and Newton shared the same heliocentric understanding of planetary motion, their understanding of the motions of comets was different. Descartes thought, as did everyone at the time, that comets, unlike planets, move in a linear way, zipping from one solar system to the next. Newton, through careful observation of the night sky, realized the comets don't move like everyone thought. Comets move in a closed loop, just like planets, only on a different orbital plane. This was just theory until Edmund Hubble made observations not in the night sky, but the historical record. He discovered that a comet had appeared every 75 years in the night sky for centuries. Even then, this new explanation of comets was looked upon with suspicion. But if a comet shows up periodically every 75 years in the past, it should also show up in the future every 75 years. The first time it showed up as predicted ahead of time was a big deal. That was in the 19th century classical era. That same comet has appeared every 75 years since. Newton's theory of comets was proven correct. It is this new understanding of comets that proved a catastrophe to Descartes' vortex theory. It could not explain this new understanding of comets. While all the planets certainly seem to move as if they are caught up in the same rotating fluid, comets move differently. Their motion is diagonal to that motion and cannot be explained by the same motion that explains planetary motion. While Descartes' theory is legitimately the more simple explanation of planetary motion alone, because it invented no new concepts, it cannot also explain the motion of comets. Just as Occam's razor states that the more simple explanation is not always the correct one. Here is an example. Newton's theory may have invented a concept, but it was able to explain comets as well as planets, while Descartes' theory was only able to explain planets. The vortex theory was abandoned for this reason. This is where the story of Rene Descartes' vortex theory ends, but I think that ending was premature. My reasons are simple. How rotating fluids were understood back then are different from how rotating fluids are understood today. It's this difference in understanding of rotating fluids that explains why Descartes' vortex theory failed to explain this new understanding of comets. Both Descartes and Newton studied rotating fluids, but they only looked at what takes place on the surface of water. An understanding of what takes place inside rotating fluids did not exist until the 19th century classical era. Just by looking at rotating fluids and the objects that can get caught in them, it's easy to see how fluids rotate in a horizontal direction. What was discovered in the 19th century is that rotating fluids move in two directions simultaneously. They rotate horizontally, but there is also a vertical rotation that naturally arises as well. While the diagonal motion of comets cannot be explained by the horizontal motion of rotating fluids alone, I see no reason why diagonal motion cannot be explained by the combination of the horizontal and vertical motion, because that is exactly what you get when you combine the two. Descartes' vortex theory was discarded for the wrong reasons. It was discarded because the understanding of rotating fluids at the time was incomplete. If a single rotation in two directions can explain the motion of both planets and comets without inventing any new concepts, then it is the more rational explanation. Instead of casting aside the wave theory to save Newton's theory, how about we try the opposite, casting aside Newton's theory in order to save the wave theory? Replace Newton's theory with something more simple, and you remove the conflict between light and planetary motion. Instead of a complicated universe that makes no sense, you end up with a simple, intuitive universe. Some people like complexity. Personally, I prefer simplicity. Some people seem to prefer to be told what to think and believe. I choose to base my beliefs upon what I see and what I think myself. For these reasons, I do not believe in theoretical physics. The end.